the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
We have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. On immigration, both as a candidate and as a president, Donald Trump has promised that he was going to focus first on people who had serious legal problems, either as having misdemeanors or felonies, what he likes to call colloquially bad hombres. But that's not what we've seen locally so far. Back in April, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, arrested and deported Maribel Trujillo Diaz, a mother of four who was living and working in Hamilton, Ohio. And then 2 weeks ago, ICE arrested Julio Motino, the father of two, with no criminal record, in the midst of a meeting that he and his wife had requested with the United States Immigration Services, seeking a path to regularize his status. Neither Diaz nor Motino fit any definition of bad hombre. So what is the policy under Donald Trump? And what should immigration attorneys be advising their clients? To discuss this, I am joined this morning by Matthew Benson, the attorney for Julian Motino. Mr. Benson is an attorney with the firm of Bartlett and Weigel and is a specialist in immigration law. He is a former chair of the Ohio chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Appreciate it.
Let's start out. There's a lot of different kinds of immigration law that people can practice. Some people deal a lot with people who may be in the country and have the problems that we're going to talk a lot about this morning.
Sure.
Others may be working with corporations to help them get the right visas to get people in. What sort of law do you practice?
Absolutely, Dan. Within the specialty of immigration law, there are different specialties within it, or niches. As you mentioned, some attorneys focus on employment-based immigration. You're seeking to bring software engineers, nurses, that type of thing. Me, primarily, I work in family-based immigration. You're a U.S. citizen spouse petitioning for a parent or husband, wife abroad, as well as deportation defense is a big part of my practice. And then I also do quite a bit of asylum work. Asylum is, of course, for individuals who have a fear of being persecuted, harmed, mistreated in their home country. So our law firm handles all aspects of immigration and law, but I specialize primarily in deportation defense, family, and asylum.
So you are the attorney for Julian Motino?
Correct. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about his case, his situation, and how long you've been involved with it, and up till the point when he was arrested, what you really thought was going on up till that moment.
So he and his wife, Alexis, came to me last year, and we did some background checking on his case.
And just to be clear, is Alexis, I know she is a U.S. citizen. Was she born in the United States?
Correct. She is a natural-born U.S. citizen,
okay.
And Julian also has 2 U.S. citizen children by a prior relationship. So we were able to ascertain that Julian was from Honduras, had been here since 2005, had no criminal record whatsoever. Unfortunately, he did miss an immigration court hearing in Philadelphia back in 2009. So that was the main hurdle we had to overcome. So in lieu of remaining here unlawfully, staying in the shadows, Julian and Alexis wanted to be proactive and try to fix his status. They knew it was a risk. They knew it was a hard, long battle, but that's what they wanted to do. So that started with Alexis filing a marriage petition with USCIS. Citizenship and Immigration Services is essentially the benefits office. Okay. It used to be the INS, but now it's Citizenship and Immigration Services. So this is just to prove that, hey, the state of Ohio has recognized our marriage. We have to convince immigration that this is legit, that we're living together as husband and wife, which they clearly were. So we filed that petition, I believe, fall of last year, prior to the election. We were waiting on an interview, and that happened a couple weeks ago.
Let's say prior to the election, when that was filed, what was your expectation about that kind of case?
Well,
did you think it had a possibility?
I've had many cases like this, and it is a long, multi-step path to correcting his status, but What I thought was we would get the marriage petition approved, which we did. We walked out of there with an approval. But the plan after that was then to seek reopening of his case in Philadelphia. And I've done this for numerous people before, and that has always been the path. Again, there's certainly no guarantees because there's a few steps we have to go through. But that was the plan for all of us to walk out of that interview together, and unfortunately that did not happen. So we are still trying to reopen his case. That is the goal, and I'm optimistic about that, but it's just not the manner in which we wanted to do it.
Well, let me ask, what was he doing? He's been here since 2005. In recent years, since he's been in Cincinnati, what has he been doing? Has he been working? What kind of life has he been able to live?
He has been working as a painter. He's not using any false documentation or anything like that to work. He's been paying his taxes here. So aside from this outstanding removal order, as I said, no criminal record, wife, children, not the type of person ICE should be expending their limited resources on.
So when people hear an attorney say no criminal record, but you're dealing with somebody who came into the United States without crossed the border without documentation, without a visa. Did he cross without a visa, or did he overstay a visa?
That's correct. He entered without a visa.
Okay. Why isn't that a criminal?
Well, entering at a place not designated by the Attorney General is a misdemeanor under federal law, but in reality it's not prosecuted. He was never prosecuted for that offense. The removal proceedings in Philadelphia, they are not a criminal proceeding. They are a civil proceeding by nature. So
they're civil. They're not even
civil,
a criminal.
Yes.
Okay. So he's working, he's paying taxes. The taxes he would be paying would include Social Security and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Which he would never have access to, right?
Correct.
Now, I have people who have told me, oh, the government hasn't enforced this because this is just the way they're keeping the Social Security system afloat by having all these people who are undocumented pay in,
Sure.
which they know they'll never get access to. What do you think about that?
I hadn't really given it much thought, but it seems like a logical proposition when you pose it that way.
I have a crazy brother who believes it. So anyway, I hadn't thought about it either until my brother said it to me. But so you went to these federal facilities to. You were at the courthouse, is that right?
It's at the federal building.
Federal building downtown. That was an
550.
arranged meeting with immigration officers.
Correct.
And then you walk out of that meeting, and that's when he was arrested
Correct.
by ICE.
He was arrested in the hallway of the federal building by ICE.
Okay. Did that take you totally by surprise?
I told the family that, hey, things have changed now under Trump. Even though I haven't had this happen yet, there is always a possibility. Did I think it was going to happen? No, I didn't.
Okay.
I was optimistic he would walk out of there with Alexis and I, and we would continue the path towards correcting his status. And that's still the path. It's just unfortunately taking place with him in custody right now.
So he's in custody, has not yet been deported?
No, we have a stay of deportation in place, which blocks immigration from deporting him.
So where is he being held?
He's at Morrow County Jail, which is just north of Columbus.
Okay. What's your expectation about that? Because in the Maribel case, she did end up getting deported.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't represent her. I should preface it by saying that.
Right, I know that.
And I can just speak for Mr. Motino, and now we do have an approved marriage petition, which is the first step in a path to him getting permanent resident or green card status. And I think we have a good argument in terms of why his case should be reopened. So I can just tell you, in his case, I am hopeful that we'll be successful. If we get the case reopened, we can then seek a bond for him.
So what are you telling other clients now that you've had somebody run into this situation where they've gotten arrested? Mm-hmm. What are you telling other clients they should or should not do? Well,
every case is different, and you've got to evaluate each case on its own set of facts. You're looking at immigration history, criminal history, and even though these are scary times for immigrants, I advise people not to panic. They need to meet with a competent immigration attorney. They need to know their rights and know their options and make an intelligent decision. I do see people, and I just determine sometimes it's too risky for them to file anything. So occasionally that's my advice. Some people I see, they might have been here for decades. They might have no criminal history. They may have U.S. citizen-born children, and they still have no path or no applications available to them. So a lot of people I see, I simply can't help. I can't file anything for.
So, the idea of why don't people who are here and who maybe have been here for some period of time and who have jobs and who have families, is there literally no path for them? Why don't they just get legal?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions out there, Dan. I speak with people. Every April I go to Washington, D.C. and meet with congressmen and their aides, and you hear that a lot. Why don't they just get legal? Or why don't they go outside and the country and wait in line? And the fact is, if you entered unlawfully or overstayed your visa, your options are extremely limited. As I said, every case is different, but again, there's no just catch-all application you can file.
There isn't a form.
There's not a form, yeah. Again, sometimes there are unique wrinkles to the immigration laws, and we can help people. If you overstay a visa, I would say you have a lot more options than someone who entered unlawfully, as a general rule. If you overstayed your visa, you might have more options through a marriage petition than someone who entered unlawfully.
How does the whole question of sanctuary cities play into this? The mayor announced that Cincinnati was a sanctuary city, but then also says that it doesn't violate any federal laws. So I'm not quite sure what that means and what it means, not so much for policy for the city, but for any individual person who is here undocumented.
Well, the concept of sanctuary cities, I don't believe it's defined anywhere. I think there's a lot of misinterpretation in terms of what it stands for. But this concept of sanctuary cities essentially means we are saying that it is not our job to enforce federal immigration law. That is within the purview of the United States government and the Department of Homeland Security. Local law enforcement, they have plenty of problems of their own to deal with. They don't need to enforce federal immigration laws. So that's the main concept behind sanctuary cities. The other part of it is there needs to be trust between local law enforcement, the court systems, and their immigrant community. If I'm the victim of a violent crime, I ought to feel safe to go testify in court, for instance. And if ICE is rounding people up in courthouse hallways, I'm not going to feel too good about that. So there needs to be trust between the immigrant communities and law enforcement. And that's the other part, I think, of what sanctuary cities stand for. Just the mayor saying that, hey, we love and respect and need our immigrant community. It doesn't mean that ICE can't do their job within the city of Cincinnati. It just means local law enforcement, that's not their responsibility.
Okay. If ICE asks, as I understand it, if ICE asks about a specific person who maybe has been taken into custody, which at that point I guess is now in the sheriff's hands.
Sure.
The sheriff has made it clear that they will respond to that question, right? It's not like they refuse to cooperate with ICE.
True, but they may not recognize a detainer or ICE hold like they used to. So,
okay.
Yeah.
What about this question? A couple of years ago, Metropolitan Area Religious Coalition, MARC, along with Catholic Charities and a lot of other organizations, wanted to find a way to provide non-governmental IDs. People who are undocumented can't get a driver's license. They can't, but the feeling was they would be helped by having some sort of ID. So these aren't governmental. What would you tell a client at this point about even seeking something like that? Because that's one more place you have to sign up.
Sure. I don't really think the potential pros outweigh any negative. I mean, it's not going to lead to a driver's license, a social security number, or permission to work. So I do appreciate their efforts, and it is good to have some form of identification. I just don't know the true benefits behind it.
So you don't see it as particularly important?
No.
To what extent are these two cases, the one in Hamilton, the one that you were directly involved with, just total outliers? You know, that it seems like from the outside, all of a sudden these two things have popped up. Do you detect, though, any fundamental change in federal enforcement policy in this area, or are we still sort of living with what we've been living with for the last few years?
To be honest, Dan, for I would say January, February, most of March of this year, it seemed like it was business as usual. Similar to under Obama, if I had a client that was, say, arrested and detained at the Butler County Jail, for the most part, they would have what was labeled a priority offense, a significant misdemeanor, a DUI, something of that nature. So it seemed like it was business as usual for a couple months, but lately I have seen a shift, and I'm seeing individuals held on, aside from the two cases you've mentioned, held on relatively minor offenses, driving without a license, disorderly conduct, which prior to Trump was not a priority for the Obama administration. We've even seen people detained and put into immigration proceedings without any criminal history, as you know.
Because you're interacting with the immigrant community, what do you think their reaction has been in terms of, and I'm talking about the undocumented immigrant community, in terms of their ability to observe policy changes and the potential impact, and what have people been doing in response to that?
I think they're very scared right now, and why they should be scared, I think it's important that they live their lives and also know their rights and abide by our laws here. And for the most part, most of them do. As Trump said, we want to get the bad hombres out. Well, there might be a few of those, and I can't really dispute that. But the vast majority of people that I deal with are good people. They work hard, they're here to support their families, and they do abide by the law. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about foreign nationals committing more crimes than U.S. citizens. That's just not the case. In fact, studies show that foreign nationals commit less crimes than natural-born U.S. citizens.
Be a whole bunch of reasons,
Absolutely.
sociological reasons
Sure.
for that. And in relationship to that, and here's sort of a anecdotal observation. In the place that I live, we had a grounds crew, it's a condo development, that was made up seemingly of Central Americans. And this season, they're not there.
Sure.
And is your sense that people are leaving, getting out? And the flip side of that, is there any indication that fewer people are trying to come into the United States?
That's a great question. And as far as I want to speak a little bit about the border, I think there's this, again, I've said the word misconception a lot today, but a lot of people think our southern border is just Swiss cheese and drug dealers and unlawful individuals are coming here. That's simply not the case. The border is more secure than it's been in the last 4 decades. And as you mentioned, a lot of people are leaving. Immigration from Mexico, citizens of Mexico, is at a net zero right now. So this concept that the border is just Swiss cheese and people are flooding in is just not accurate anymore. What I have seen in the last 2 years is an influx of individuals from Central America, the Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and these are primarily women and children asylum seekers. They're not just economic refugees.
And that's different
absolutely,
because they have fear of the violence in their homeland.
And yes, and they are not trying to sneak in. They are claiming asylum as soon as they are approached at the border.
Crossing at regular crossing points?
Well, not necessarily, but they are surrendering to border agents and
yeah.
claiming asylum. And as I said, they're not just economic refugees. They fear the worst forms of violence, be it domestic violence, gang-related violence, politically motivated violence. So a lot of these women and children have very viable asylum claims. Now, unfortunately, a lot of them get detained and are housed in these large facilities in Texas. I volunteered at one in February for a week, and it was just women and children detained by the Department of Homeland Security. It's
and my understanding is the courts are really backed up in terms of processing any of that.
True. We have, I believe, 58, 59 immigration courts throughout the country, 250 immigration judges, and I believe as of right now we have almost 600,000 cases pending. So again, these are the individuals the government knows about and are actively trying to remove. So that tells you how many cases the judges are dealing with. The backlog is just out of control, and it's only going to get worse if ICE doesn't exercise discretion. For instance, and again, these are people that are, some individuals are in custody during the removal proceedings. Those cases should move, I say should, move relatively quickly, finished within the matter of a few months. If you're out on your own recognizance or out on a bond and you file an application for relief, I've got hearings 4 or 5 years out right now. So it's just a broken system no matter which way you look at it.
Well, one final point, I'm very aware too that some of these unaccompanied minors, children, are ending up in our child care system.
Sure.
Because there's no place for them as well. Matt, thank you for being here this morning, for explaining what you do and the changing shift in the policy, and we'll see what happens over the next couple of months.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Can you name the last U.S. president to visit Cincinnati to talk about the Ohio River locks and dams? Stay tuned for a brief history lesson. Welcome back. Last Wednesday, President Trump visited Cincinnati to promote his plans to strengthen America's infrastructure. Some people were surprised that he chose to focus on modernizing the Ohio River lock and dam system rather than rebuilding the Brent Spence Bridge. But as important as that interstate bridge is to American commerce, the river is equally important. Day and night, 365 days a year, tows of barges are pushed up and down, filled with coal, grain, and petroleum along the entire length of the Ohio River. River commerce has been a priority of the United States government since its founding in the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1775. Now a little history quiz. What other sitting president came to Cincinnati to talk about the importance of locks and dams? Here's a story I did in 1988 that focused on just that question. Pay attention to the exact date of this event.
The eyes of the nation were turned to Cincinnati on October the 22nd, 1929. On that day, President Herbert Hoover came here to dedicate the Navigation Monument in Eden Park, celebrating the completion of the first system of dams and locks on the Ohio. These early wooden dams guaranteed minimum 9-foot pools all year long, but they also posed some new challenges.
The most demanding thing on those packet boats was to get the men out of those old-fashioned locks that had low walls with the wind blowing. Those boats were 50 feet out of the water and they were about 4 feet in the water. And so they were just balloons. Wherever the wind was blowing, there's where they were going. And when they were going toward a concrete wall, that wasn't so hot. Yeah, you wanted to have the smokestack still right side up when you left.
The dams worked. They kept navigation open even during the extreme droughts of the 1930s. But it took 20 minutes to lock through just one dam, and in some stretches of the river, the dams were so close together that a pilot had to blow his whistle for the next lock as soon as he exited the one above. The original wooden dam system dedicated by Herbert Hoover in 1929 has all been replaced, but the commitment to keeping the Ohio River open 365 days a year remains strong. Last summer's drought was proof of that.
Some of us have aged in 20 years. Did you catch the date of that visit, September the 22nd, 1929? What happened exactly a week later? If you said the stock market crash of 1929 that ushered in the Great Depression of the 1930s, you're right. And that was the end of the glorious rebirth of the Midwestern economy Hoover predicted during his time in Cincinnati. And in effect, the end of Hoover's policy agenda and political career. After World War II, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers undertook a program to replace the original 53 wicket dams with over 600-foot locks with 18 permanent high-lift concrete dams with 1,200-foot locks, like that of the Markland Dam, opened in 1964. The problem today is that those locks need to be lengthened again so that the tows don't have to break their loads and take their barges through in small groups. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women working to craft a better region for our future. Have a good week.